Hey everyone, thanks for joining. And today our guest is Becky Wade Firth, author of Run the World, and she's also an elite marathoner with a PB of 2:30 from the California International Marathon. She's also a four-time All-American from the NCAA. So, welcome, Becky. What's the race you'd most like to forget?
I've got plenty of them, but number one would be the 2016 Olympic marathon trials. Do you want any context?
Sure, I know it was really hot, but
Yeah, it was hot. I was training in Houston at the time, so I can't really pin anything on the heat. But I was, it was, I had done a couple of marathons before, but that was like my first major marathon. I think I did two only before, and they were both kind of low key. And I just felt like the weight of the world on me. I felt like I had to be perfect, that everyone was expecting so much of me when, like, looking back now, that wasn't the case. But I just totally crumbled and finished, but not admirably. And that was a tough one to get over.
okay, so what's your favorite workout?
When I'm in very good shape, I love doing mile repeats, like five or six in 10K training, up to 10 when I'm doing marathon training.
And least favorite workout?
Um, I think my least favorite workout is some kind of fartlek. I like them like during certain times of the year, especially when I'm kind of getting back into shape, but I have a hard time, like, I'm always questioning whether I'm pushing hard enough or too hard. And so it's good for me to run them, but I have a hard time when I don't have feedback to, like, trust that I'm doing it right.
So you like distances then, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, distances, like pretty known things.
Okay. What is your favorite shoe?
The shoe that I've run the most in over the span of my lifetime would be the Mizuno Wave Rider. I wore them in, I think, a little bit in middle school, throughout high school, off and on in college, and then they've kind of been in my rotation more lately than, yeah.
Great. And then last one, if you could do another Olympic sport, what would it be?
I think gymnastics or ice skating, just given like my build and not that I'm like super coordinated or graceful or anything, but I think it would be fun to be good at those things.
Okay, cool. All right. So some longer answer questions, and the majority of people on here are Canadian. So we're going to start with a Canadian-centered question, and then we'll go and talk about other stuff. So you ran north of the border for the first time at the Toronto Marathon, Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon last fall. So Alan's on here, so you got to be careful what you say. How was the experience? How was that experience?
The experience was amazing. It was like the reason that I read a whole blog post about why I chose Toronto before I went there. And the reason that I wanted to go there was because I heard that it was very well organized and executed in terms of just the logistics, the pacing, just like there was never any doubt about what was going to happen when. And, athletes I heard were well taken care of. And I also, so that was why I chose it. That was one of the main reasons. The timing was good. I've heard fall up there was really nice, and it's, mid-October. So went up there. All of that was very true. I thought it was perfect for what I was looking for. I didn't have a great race, so I'll talk about that in a second. But like from yeah, as far as logistics, organization, course, weather, all of it was like I wouldn't change anything about that. I would change the way I ran. Maybe not the way I ran because I kind of needed to go for the Olympic standard, but I got a little banged up in my last month of training. So knew it was like a little bit risky to go out hard and did it anyways. But still, like, a race is doing something right when you can be very disappointed in the way that you performed, but walk away thinking like that was still a great experience and I would totally do that again. So, Alan, great job to you and your team. I will be back.
That was going to be my next question. When are you coming back?
Hopefully soon, whenever travel resumes.
Cool.
But one other thing that not this is not specifically about that marathon, but I've gotten to know a bunch of the Canadian runners over the years, mostly through like running at Houston every
Houston.
year and some of the majors. You know, I see like Krista and Rachel and Emily, like Kinsey, all of them, and everyone is just like so friendly. And I've gotten even to work with a few of them in races before, just like, you know, helping trade off leads and stuff like that. And that's a cool thing because it's a little different than the US scene, which is just big and, you know, people are friendly, but it's not so tight knit because there's so many of us.
Great. So I'm going to do Alan a favor and plug that we have lots of other half marathons and 10Ks across the country too. So look
Yeah.
into those as well if you're looking for a tune-up race.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about my favorite book, Run the World. Well, my favorite running book, I should say. I don't really have a specific favorite book,
Thank
but
you.
I loved it. I couldn't put it down. So I want to know, and I hope everybody on here has read it. If you haven't, go and pick it up. But why did you write a book? Why did you decide to write the book? Because I don't think you talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not asked that often. I actually was very resistant to writing a book for a good while, and I went into that trip I didn't have any requirements from the fellowship to produce anything from it. So just on my own, I wanted to blog a little bit so that I wouldn't have to be emailing my mom every day and like, you know, trying to keep different people posted. And then I also just kept a journal for my own purposes. Like I knew I'd want to someday look back and kind of remember what I was going through and all that. And so I came back, you know, a year after traveling, and one of my really good friends from high school, a teammate actually, is now a literary agent, and it was her idea, and she kind of put it in my mind. And for almost a year, I was like, "Thank you for that idea. That's very kind, but no, that was like, how can you capture a year when you're like constantly on the go, meeting people, doing things? How can you capture that on paper?" So I just thought that's too overwhelming of a task. I can't do it justice. No, thank you, but no, thank you. And then finally, the idea was like still in my mind. And I just finally came around to it thinking like, well, I'll at least put together a proposal, you know, for a publishing company. And if something happens of it, cool, I'll pursue it. If not, that's fine. I'm not set on doing this anyway. So the ball kind of got rolling, and then I got more into it. And ultimately, I kind of came to see it as like almost like a long thank you note to the many, many people who hosted me and ran with me and showed me around and just kind of took me under their wing in their own cities. So, yeah, that's how it happened.
All right, so I have a bunch of follow-up questions, and I'm assuming a lot of people will have some too. So you talk about different aspects of running in your book. You talk about warm-ups, you talk about eating habits, you talk about workouts, but you don't talk about strength training. And this is particular when it comes to Ethiopia is where I'm curious about this. Were there different like approaches to strength training throughout the world, or is it pretty much formal, like the same thing as we do here in North America?
You know, I didn't really see too much strength training in most of those countries, and maybe some of it was lack of me asking, but for the most part I just kind of shadowed the people that I was staying with and like the people I was running with. I will say in Ethiopia there is very little supplementary work, at least from what I saw. Not much core. They do a bunch of drills, like different than what we do, and I have a bunch of videos of those. I'll at some point get around to putting up, but they do a bunch of drills, but no strength work that I saw, at least in terms of like using equipment or body weight to work on like building muscle. Didn't really see any core. In other places, I think I don't know. Distance runners are like, and I think this is changing, and it's changed a lot in the last like 5 years.
Yeah,
Distance runners are kind of averse to the weight room, I think.
they can
Um,
join the club.
yeah, and I've been coming around to it more in the last few years, but certainly in college and while I was traveling, that was an afterthought. That was not
Yeah.
something that was a priority, and that's pretty much what I found. There were for sure a few people that I stayed with, or like more elite, like Olympic level runners that I met along the way who did have their own routines. And like I got to see some of that, but that was not a major part of many of the traditions that I explored.
So you mean Haile Gebrselassie wasn't there pumping iron the whole time?
I can't speak for him, but I never, yeah, I don't know of any. I'm not sure about his strength routine. I saw his house, and I don't remember. I remember seeing a treadmill, but I don't remember seeing weight equipment.
Okay. All right. So, and this question was submitted to me a lot. So do you have advice for somebody who's interested in embarking on a similar trip? So maybe not able to cover as many countries. And then how did you find the contacts for places to stay? Because I think that was key, right? If you didn't have those contacts, it would have
Mhm.
been a much different experience.
Yeah. So if this is a runner asking that question,
Yeah.
I think we are literally in the perfect sport to do this because I went into my trip thinking I was only going to go to 5 countries, and that was part of my proposal. I was applying for this fellowship, and I named the 5 countries I was going to go to. I planned on staying in an apartment or a hostel everywhere, and like as soon as I got to England and started making friends, that those plans just went out the window, and like so many people were hooking me up with friends and family, and they're like running clubs in different countries or just connecting me to different people. And so I found that the running community and like literally everywhere that I thought about going was very receptive to me, and eager to show me around, show me what they do, let me jump in workouts. So for someone who's interested in doing something like that, I know I lucked out because this was a fellowship, and like this was a grant that I was able to pursue whatever I wanted for 1 year all around the world. And so that's not something that's easy for people to just like up and go for a year, especially the funded part. That's nice. But I think I kind of see it as like having kids or being injured. There's never like a convenient time, but you just have to like do it, commit to doing it. And it's hard now because traveling is like suspended for a while, but I think it's just a matter of like deciding to do it and just going for it. Because I know so many people who say they love travel and they can't wait to get out again, but like 1 year later, they're still working their same 9 to 5. They haven't taken like a big vacation or anything like that. And so if you care about it, just like set aside some of your paycheck every month and start. The way that I connected with people, it also evolved as I went. Sometimes it was in person, like this all started like my itinerary exploded basically based on one person that I met in England who is from Ireland and part of this rich Irish running tradition. And so he was like, oh, you got to go stay with my friend Kieran and meet my coach Patsy. So then like it just took off from there. So sometimes that would happen in person. If I was ever going somewhere and I didn't have a contact and I was still set on going there, I would just kind of start emailing, like Google searching or Facebook or whatever, like running clubs in Auckland or wherever I was going. And more often than not, like someone would pretty quickly respond. And if they couldn't help me, they'd pass me on to someone who could. And, the running world's like pretty small too. If I reached out to, let's say, like someone who went to my university is from Switzerland, I could like reach out and just say, hey, do you know anyone who would be willing to like let me train with them for a few weeks, or who has a guest room or something like that. So I had to learn to put myself out there more and like ask for things, and I think that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And so that's a hard thing, but there's other ways to do it. Hostels are cheap. Since that trip I've traveled plenty and have always kind of found a way to do it on a budget, cooking wherever you're staying, and there's ways to do it.
There you go. Advice from the pro. Okay, so you ran in Ethiopia and you trained with the Yaya Girls. Is that right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Have you heard, and then you said you may not have heard, you may never hear from them again, right? Because of the maybe technological challenges they have. So have you heard anything from them, and have they had any breakthroughs in their running that you know of?
So I was there at the very end of 2012. Didn't hear a word from them because they don't have computers in this rural village. The Yaya Girls didn't have computer access, and there's also not a reliable postal system. So, and then I had a couple of friends who were also at Yaya, either working or visiting, and by within a few months they were all gone. So I just didn't have a way to keep in touch with them, and that was hard. But the most amazing thing happened because I went back to Ethiopia 5 years later in 2017. Went back to stay at Yaya Village, and unfortunately that program had disbanded, so the girls weren't around, and I didn't know many of the people. And I went on a run in the same forest that I used to run in my first trip, and on one of my last runs of my second trip, I see this silhouette off in the distance, and I'm thinking like, that looks a lot like Durartu, but there's just no way. That would be like too random. But I like got closer to her and closer to her, and sure enough, it was Durartu, and I yelled at her, and I was also thinking like, she's not gonna remember me. This was 5 years ago. She was so much like, she was a much bigger part of my life than I was in hers, I'm sure. But I yelled at her, and like, it took her a second, and it immediately clicked after that. We like had this huge embrace. We're both in tears. And the kind of crazy thing is that we still couldn't really communicate because I don't speak Amharic more than a few words, and she doesn't speak more than a few words of English. And, we still had like such a good connection through running and eating and just like hanging out 5 years earlier that we were able to kind of rekindle that on the run.
Did they
So,
ever? Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, but beyond that, no, I don't know.
So
And
we
I
don't know if they need to go to Allen's races anytime soon or stuff like that.
don't, I don't know. I don't think the other two are still running anymore,
Okay.
at least from what I could gather. I know one of them got married and had kids, and I think has kind of moved on. And the other one, I think, is now working in tourism.
Okay.
So I would like to go back. I was planning on going back this spring, but that, of course, didn't happen. So hopefully I can find some updates at some point.
All right. So my last question, and I'm sure you get this one a lot. If you could go back to only one country, which one would it be?
I would have to say Ethiopia. There were so many countries that I loved, like Switzerland's high up there, New Zealand, Australia. Like, I would go back to all of them for sure, but Ethiopia is the one that I just feel like my heart is in. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I've just a couple more questions, and then I'll open it up to the floor. So this year's U.S. Olympic trials was a little crazy, just generally. There were lots of fans, which was awesome. The TV coverage was mediocre at best in terms of covering the women's race. So because we didn't really see much of it, can you quickly take us through your race? Because you finished an impressive 16th, and then kind of walk us through maybe how that women's race developed, because a lot of us didn't get a chance to see it.
Sure. Yeah. So it was kind of cool the way that the course was laid out because I got to both participate and kind of spectate both different things happening in the women's field and also the men's field because we passed each other so many times. There were several hairpins and it was a loop course. So we got to kind of keep on top of the action as much as we wanted. So personally, my race was how do I describe it? So I started pretty conservative, and that was the plan. Just knowing how deep the field was and how traumatic my last marathon trials experience was. I wanted to give myself a good opportunity to run well. And there's a saying like, no risk, no reward. I wasn't very risky, but I knew that like my best race would come from running smart. And that course was really, really tough. You can like look at the DNF list and kind of gather that. But so personally, I just tried to run like very controlled and easy for the first 3 loops, and the loops were 8 miles each. And I was pretty fortunate early on because I found myself running next to Carrie Demoff, who's a very good runner. She runs for the Bowerman Elite group, so like one level below the Bowerman Track Club that you know of. And I knew, so she'd run at world championships, and she's just a solid racer. She's good.
She
She's
was
fast.
top 10 at the world.
Exactly. Yeah. So she's very good. And so I found myself next to her. And so we just kind of started talking, and I knew her a little bit before, but I was kind of thinking like, okay, if I can stick with this girl, like I'm going to be in a pretty good spot. And we ran most of the whole race together, like probably over 20 miles. And every time one of us got a little bit eager, the other one would kind of be like, oh, we still got, you know, that major hill to run 3 more times. And so it was really helpful. We just kind of ran side by side. She's probably my height, my size, so we weren't really blocking the wind for each other, but we were just like stride for stride, helping each other out. And we started pretty like far back in the pack. I think the furthest back I was mid 40s, a couple of miles in. And before the race, I had this discussion with my coach, like, I'm not going to freak out when I'm really far back because I know people are going to go out hard and I know people are going to die. And so I was fine with it. I didn't know my place, and I didn't want to know my place until later on. So we kind of just cruised. We were definitely passing people with each mile, just like little by little, people who I think, you know, had maybe thought they were going to have their dream day and wind up in the top 15 or 20 or whatever. And people who went out way too hard and aggressively. So we just kind of worked our way up through the pack. And as I expected, a bunch of people dropped out. So it was definitely tough. I can't say I have regrets, because maybe had I gone out with the lead pack, there was a lead pack of maybe 15 or 20 running together for probably the first like 18 miles or something. Do I think I could have handled it? Probably. My training had gone really well. I didn't have any interruptions, and like I was confident and stuff, but I don't regret not going with him because I ran my race. I think I ran like pretty smart, if not aggressively. And I did finish well. I think I passed like, I don't know, 15 or 12 people in the last 10K or something like that. But it was really cool. Like when we were maybe in the last add-on loop or something, that was when I first got a glimpse of the breakaway women who had left the lead pack. And I saw Alafine, who wasn't a surprise to me. Then I saw Molly Seidel, who was a surprise
to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw them, and then I was kind of thinking like, that's the leaders, right? Or like, did I miss some of them? And sure enough, they just like, that was incredible. And it was kind of cool because when I saw them, I saw Sally, Des, Laura. It was like not by any means a decided race at that point. So I knew there were people chasing them, and if only I were able to watch the finish while still finishing, that would have been ideal.
So you're obviously a running fan too then. So that must have been like looking at Molly and Alafine's performances must have kind of been motivating for you as well then at some level anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I know both of them like decently well from races and stuff. And they're both like very, very humble. You know, they're good and they're not afraid to go, and they're confident and stuff. But I think the fact that there were so many talented people who had a shot in that field made everyone just like pretty humble and hungry. And just, it's crazy to think what, especially Molly, who's so young and, you know, first marathon, it's crazy to think what is possible for her and the kind of the rest of the up and comers. There's a lot of people who I think can be way better. So that'll be fun to watch.
Well, fingers crossed for everybody. Tokyo actually happens, so we can see them race at that level. But my last question is: so after you came back from your trip, you debuted in the marathon and ran 2:30, as I recall, and which was one of the fastest debuts by an American under 25 ever. It was in the top 3 or 4, if I recall. And then in that race, you won CIM, which is impressive in itself. And you competed in a few Olympic trials now. So what's next for you? What's like that next aspiration you're driving towards?
I'm really just hungry to run a great marathon, because I look back at the training that I did for that first marathon, and it's like, a little bit net downhill. So, maybe it was worth a little bit slower than that. But like, I have done so much better training in the last 7 years since then. So it's just crazy to me that I haven't improved upon that. And part of it is just not executing. Part of it is, I'd say, like, the majority of my marathons have been in really rough conditions, like hottest London marathon in history, 80-degree day in Houston with 99% humidity, things like Los Angeles marathon trials, things like that. So I know that my day is going to come when things come together. And I'm just not satisfied with the marathon. So I'll continue to do that. I was planning on getting on the track this year to run the track trials. I'd done the steeplechase in the last 2 track trials, so not planning on doing that again. But I feel like I have a much better 10K in me. So I'll plan on running a marathon later this year, assuming, that happens. And then getting on the track next summer. I think it's good to like shake things up for marathon training and then get back in the marathon cycle.
Great. And Toronto is always there for you if you want. So I got to plug it. So we got a couple good questions here. And actually, the first one I want to ask, but decided to not. On your website, you list your shot put personal record, personal best. I don't say personal record. What was the last time you put a shot? And what is your attraction to shot put?
I've only put a shot one time, and it was my 5th year at Rice. There was like a little home meet happening, and I was out there just volunteering. I wasn't racing that weekend, and my coach is like, "This is crazy, but we need one more participant in the shot put in order for it to be legitimate." I was like, "I'm in. I'm gonna go get my uniform." And so it was really fun. All of the throwers from like Harvard, there were several schools visiting at the time. They were giving me tips. I was horrendous, but my claim to fame, I put it along with my other PRs, because for 1 week I was in the top 10 for our conference in shot put, and that's because only 10 people had thrown that week. But I probably will never do that again.
Still counts if you're in the top 10.
Right.
So I've got a few more questions. Oh, this is a good one. How did you convince your husband to pace you for a marathon? Asking for a friend is one of the questions.
He's really great. I didn't really have to convince him. He's paced me in, I think, maybe 3 or 4 now, including Toronto. And I don't really have to convince him. So he ran at Rice with me also. He's a couple years younger, and he was a steeplechaser as well. And so I've just kind of like dragged him along as I've moved up in distance, and he does most of my training with me. He doesn't do quite the volume, and he'll do his own speed work and that kind of stuff. But when I'm like really in the thick of a buildup, he's pacing me and doing everything with me. He's like my training partner. So whenever the opportunity is there for him to pace, like he was one of the pacers in the Houston half marathon this year, where there are a bunch of women running, like shooting for 70 or faster. And he was like well in that mix. So that was fun. I'm just fortunate that he's a good runner and better than me. So my stuff isn't like super, super taxing to him. And he's just willing.
There you go. You need somebody willing, and just train them very hard.
Keep them healthy. That's key.
Yes. Colleen asks, do you plan on writing another book? She loved Run the World.
Yeah, love it. I've been messaging you.
Yeah, I recognize your name.
Funny story, I was traveling to Houston, first time reading that book, and I was like, okay, I've given it as a gift to girlfriends of mine, but have never read it until that point. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a good book. And I was like, where am I going to run when I'm in Houston? And you mentioned the loop around Rice and everything. I'm like, perfect book to read during this time.
Oh, awesome.
It's still on my nightstand. But yeah,
Thank
I
you.
read another book.
Thank you so much. I would like to write another book. After I finished the first one, I swore it off. I was like, never again. That was too stressful. But now, like a few years later, I think the rough memories have faded and the good memories have kind of surfaced. So I would like to write another book. I'm not sure what exactly it would be about. So that's pretty key before I dive into the process. But naturally something running, maybe travel related, but yeah, wheels are kind of turning. This would be a great time to start that process, but still kind of waiting on like that idea.
Flanagan wrote a cookbook. You could do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually I made my own little cookbook from the recipes when I was traveling, and like a few of them made it into the book, but most of them didn't. So that was fun, but that was just like my own personal thing. I didn't like actually double test the recipes or anything like that. But yeah.
You've got the makings of another good book right there. So another question is, how long do you see yourself running competitively for? And what would you like to transition into after?
The running thing, I don't know. I've always just said I'm going to keep doing this as long as I'm still enjoying it and improving. And I'm doing both of those. And I feel like I still have things that major things that I haven't done yet that I would like to do. So I don't have an answer. It is pretty exciting to see women in their late 30s and early 40s still just crushing me too. And that's cool. So I think I'll be at this for a good while. Whether this will be like my number one priority, I'm not sure. I would like to have a family at some point, but I don't think I've seen enough women do both that's something I would like to do at some point. And then transitioning, probably something to do with writing, maybe something to do with a nonprofit. I've done like various things since graduating, and still like freelance writing, so I'm not just running. And I don't know, I'm interested in going back to school maybe at some point. I don't know what for, or just like getting back in kind of academia. It'd be cool to be like a fellowship advisor or career counselor. I'm not really qualified to give career advice yet, but maybe something like that.
The world is your oyster. So follow up, is that Eugene 2020, I guess 2022, is that in the back of your mind? Being on US soil for world champs?
Yeah, that would be super cool. And of course, there's a ton of people who are in my position who think that would be cool. But that's a goal, and I think that's kind of wide open because a lot of people forego the world championships because there's no appearance fee, there's no prize money. It's not always
prize money for the marathon.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't even know that, but
yeah.
I would do it for sure. Do it anyways if I made it. And it's also not necessarily somewhere that people can go to run fast, depending on where it is. But I would do it, yeah, and I will try to do it.
I think both the Canadian team and the American team is going to be very competitive because being in North America, you actually get attention.
Yeah.
Hopefully from national media. So.
Totally.
Okay, Colleen has another question, and it's a good one. Have you ever had an injury that has set you back longer than expected? I've certainly been in this predicament before, so I would love any advice you have.
Yes, many. The biggest injury that I just had no idea what I was in for was when I tore my hip labrum in college, and that was right before my fourth year, and I took 5 years, and that was about a 2-year process. From like actually tearing it took about 6 months to get diagnosed, and then another few months to have surgery, and then rehab, I mean, I came back too quickly from rehab and set myself back at least another year before I was like running normally and able to compete and stuff. And that was really super hard because that was about half of my college career. And I feel like I had kind of just started showing like signs that I could do something, and like just got my first All-American. And I actually moved out to Boulder to train for a summer. And that first week was when I finally got my MRI diagnosis that it was a torn hip labrum, and that it was either like probably wouldn't run again or I needed to have surgery and maybe could run again. So that was my most major one. I've had plenty others I could talk forever about, but as far as like, was the question like how to kind of get through them or?
Yeah. And like, just, well, like I had like 4 sacral stress fractures, which was like probably like 2 years process. And I'm like just getting back into it and have like the PTSD of like getting back. And I'm like, oh my God, will I ever, be able to run as fast? And like, did you ever have those doubts? Like, will I ever be able to hit those speeds again? As I'm doing fartleks, I'm like, that marathon effort pace, how did I ever hold that for, I'm holding it for like 3 minutes, and I'm like, I held that for how many miles? Like, so yeah.
I think my biggest fear, of course, there was that, like, will I be able to run fast again? But also my biggest fear was just like, will I be able to feel good running again? And like, can I get my normal stride back and not be like forcing this and be so uncomfortable and just feel like I'm like limping my way through everything? Because that's not fun.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I actually just wrote about this in a Runner's World article because I was thinking about this, this advice that Dina Castor gave me a few summers ago, but this was not in the context of an injury, but in the context of I was really feeling a lot of pressure to like run faster after my first marathon, and just like couldn't wrap my mind around doing some of these workouts faster than I'd done them before, despite the fact that early in the cycle and I didn't need to be doing that, but I just like, I was stuck in that mindset.
Right.
And so she really encouraged me to like start every season or whatever build up you're entering into from a totally blank slate, and not feeling like, so kind of letting go of your PRs in terms of like race fitness and also workouts, and just work like starting fresh and just building off of that every week, building off of that, not thinking like, okay, I'm getting closer to my PR self. Okay, this workout's a little bit closer to what I was able to do before, but just thinking like, how can I improve upon last week?
Yeah, great advice. Yeah.
It's worth picking up Dina's book if you want more advice.
Oh, I love that one too.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
That was really good.
All right. So Teresa has a couple questions, so I'll pass it over to Teresa.
You, Teresa?
Hi.
Hi.
So this came in the mail today.
Oh, cool.
Thanks. Stephen and I were chatting by email about book recommendations, kind of going back and forth, and he said that was his all-time favorite. So,
Stephen, I need to bring you along as my promoter.
Sure.
So I haven't even cracked it open. I flipped through and look at the photos. I'm really excited to get into it. So my first question is, who are your inspirations in running or life? And then the other one is maybe a bit more in depth. So writing this book, like what was that process like? I know you touched on it a little bit, like you struggled a bit, but you had your blog and your journal from your trip. Like how did you get that into a book? And like how long did that take you?
Yeah, good questions. I'll start with the first. Running inspirations. I've got a lot. I'll just name a few that have like been encouraging and maybe have given me like good, solid advice and inspiration over the last several years, I guess, since I've been marathoning. So definitely Dina, amazing and so wise, so positive. Like I've picked up a lot from her, especially the summer I lived in Mammoth and trained with them. Love Sarah Hall, have trained with her in Ethiopia a bit and just seen her at a bunch of races, and love the way that she races and lives. Des Linden, who doesn't love her? She's so fierce, but like so so like understated and funny, and she's just like really come very, very far since even her college days. Those three come to mind. There's a zillion more I could name. I have no shortage of people to look up to, but them. And then the book process took, I think it was about 2 years from when I started the proposal to when the book was actually published. It was about 6 months of writing the proposal, and then a couple months after that of my literary agent like pitching it to publishing companies and kind of negotiating and stuff. And then I wrote for a solid, like, I think I spent one full year writing the drafts of the book. And then it was another few months of like editing and supplement, like pictures and copyright and formatting and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, that's my coach texting me. That's a little beat. And the process was, honestly, it was mostly a great experience. I loved being able to just throw myself into something that was not my own running performance. And I liked that, like, it kind of kept me mentally engaged in a different way. And I guess the hard thing, which a lot of people are finding out now, is just finding that rhythm when you're working on something by yourself with no like supervision. I did have some self-imposed deadlines, but I didn't have an editor like breathing down my neck saying, I need this chapter now. It was kind of more like when I sent it to her, she'd review it, but she wasn't like forcing any deadlines. So it got hard towards the end of that year. And then the edits were a lot harder than I thought. Just, it's stressful thinking like every word is going to be ready for the public to review and rip apart. And, I just didn't want to get anything wrong. I didn't want to insult anyone. I didn't want to like misinterpret something, didn't want typos. And I'm sure I did a little bit of all that, but for the most part, it was an experience that like suited me and my lifestyle well.
Awesome. Thank you. Follow up. Was it hard to remember a lot of the details and conversations? I don't know how much of that you have in there, like conversations, or do you sort of improvise that a little, or how did you do that?
It was hard. I don't think I have a ton of like dialogue in there. Mm-hmm. I know I it, but I'll get this out while I'm talking about it. But
let's read.
These journals, full journals, I wrote like, I don't know, 1 to 5 pages every day of that whole year with like so many details. And again, it was kind of more of like just like a scrapbook, just like random pictures and ticket stubs and just songs that I heard and like stuff like that. Just things that like someday I'm going to like to look back through these. And they were really helpful. I leaned a lot on the people that I met and stayed with and ran with that trip. So that was a really great excuse to reconnect with people and just say like, hey, Olivia, what was that run we went on that one time? And who were those guys you brought along? And what's that dish that you made me? So there was a lot of back and forth emailing and reconnecting and catching up. So that was a really great side benefit of writing the book.
Hi, Becky.
Hi.
I haven't read your book yet, but now it's definitely in my list for sure. You have talked about the process of writing the book, but I'm curious about the trip. What was the trigger that made you decide to go on such a big trip?
Besides getting a big grant to do it.
Yeah. Well, when I was like getting kind of ready to graduate from college in the last year or 2 years really, and thinking about what I wanted to do, I kept gravitating to the idea of traveling because I have 3 siblings, all close in age to me, and they'd all studied abroad, and I just didn't have that opportunity because I was competing year round and either training or like rehabbing, and it's hard to do that when you're in another country, and not the training part, but the rehabbing part. And so I looked into every possible like study abroad, postgraduate, fellowship, all that kind of stuff that was available to graduating Rice students, which is where I went to university. And once I found out about this one particular one, I just had my heart set on it. I was like, I know I'm going to do everything I can to get this opportunity to like not just see one or two places, but to see as much of the world as I can. So I've always been interested in other cultures, and I studied psychology and sociology and history in school. So that was part of the drive. But I just felt like when I graduated from college, that was my opportunity to like really put myself out there and go see all these things that I hadn't. So that was the impetus.
Michelle.
I'm so glad to be here because you are such an inspiration to so many people, including myself, even though we ran against each other. But what I would love to hear about is, how do you feel about this increase in women in distance running, especially in America? Because I've been keeping up with you guys. And what was your observations about women in running in your other countries that you travel to? Because I'm in Morocco, and it's very few and far between where you'll see some women out on the roads running. And so I wanted to hear about your travels and what you saw when it came to like women in sport and women running in your
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my itinerary was kind of built with that in mind. And so while I would have loved to go to a place like Morocco or, like somewhere in the Middle East would have been cool, like I couldn't have easily pursued this topic. And so I didn't go during that year. So I can't really speak to places that are maybe a little bit more hostile or just more difficult for women to run. But there were definitely places that I went to that I felt like safer and more normal running as a female versus thinking like maybe I should be in a group or, like definitely running with a t-shirt rather than like a little singlet or something like that. And yeah, I didn't really have any experiences based on like my gender, but again, I think that's because of where I chose to go.
Right.
But as far, I guess I can speak a little bit more about when female running in the US, because like it has exploded. In the last, the difference between the 2016 like Olympic trials hopefuls and the 2020 or Olympic hopefuls and the 2020 Olympic hopefuls is crazy. Like when I ran 2:30, I think that was the 8th or 9th fastest time going into the 2016 trials. Now there's more than 20 women. There's probably 25 women who can run 2:30 or faster.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is like you see the people that you've run against forever, like doing these things, or people that you look up to and, they aren't like superheroes. You see them beating the Africans and like running super fast and just like getting in the mix. Whereas before there wasn't so much of that. So that's part of it. I think there's a lot going on, but it's both like a little intimidating to be part of this wave, but more than that, it's just cool because
we're rooting for you all over the world.
Thanks so much. You're so nice to stay up late for this.
I'm a fan.
So we do have one more question, and then I may ask one for the end. But what's your favorite thing to indulge in after a big race or training block?
Let's see. My husband and I do a pretty good amount of indulging, like just regularly, not necessarily like after a season. Definitely I like relax the way that I just relax everything about my life for a week or a few weeks after a season. But
You don't get out the bourbon bottle like Des does?
We're red wine drinkers year round, not after season exclusively. I guess my favorite like just I don't have an answer for like a postseason indulgence. I do love going on like food tours of whichever city I've raced in, especially if that's a marathon and I can build in a day or two. I like will, and I did this before, or yeah, for Toronto, but I will just like ask for recommendations for wherever I'm going and just like hit up as many cool places. I do, I guess one kind of guilty pleasure after a marathon that I don't do normally is like unlimited coffee. And I have coffee a lot, but I'm talking like 7 macchiatos in a day, just so I can go to as many places and compare. And we're like big coffee fans. So that's something that like we can easily spend a day doing after a race.
Great. So what's your one, and this will be the last question because I know you got to run, literally. What's the one race that's kind of on your bucket list?
Good question.
You can say the Olympic Games if you want, but maybe one that people haven't heard of either, maybe.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I certainly want to do the rest of the majors. And the ones I haven't done are Berlin, Tokyo, New York, but that's not like a very inventive answer. Gosh, I might have to get back to you on that one. There's a ton of races on my bucket list, and like sadly I've had to erase like all of them for the spring and summer. I don't know, there's some cool halves that I would like to do, like Copenhagen and I'm like kind of blanking on
Valencia's fast.
Oh, I got to run World Half Champs there.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, there you go.
That was a really very cool one. Yeah.
All right. Well, you're always welcome back in Canada to our many, many races.
I will be back, definitely.
That's good. And Ottawa is another big global race too.
Yeah, I've heard great things about Ottawa. Is that spring typically?
It's May. Actually, it would be this weekend. So sometimes it can be hot, but Sarah Hall ran her PB before she broke it in Berlin there. So
I remember that.
Maybe a good spot for Americans.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Anyway, thanks so much for this, Becky. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Stephen. Thanks for everyone for showing up and asking questions. This was a treat.